I am here right now with Dr. Solomon. It is so exciting to have you on here. Now, you studied psychology and women's studies at the University of Michigan, where you also received your PhD in counseling psychology, and you just have so much experience over 20 years as a professor, therapist, speaker, author, host, the list goes on, right? But you've been educated on psychology for so long and longer than society has probably accepted what psychology is and how much it impacts us. So I want to know from you, what do you feel like has been the biggest eye opening for people in this last, I guess, 10 years that we've really started to see people accept psychology and what it means to us and how it can help us?
Well, yeah, I think you're exactly right, Morgan. This is a really exciting time for my field. I think that certainly when I was training, there was a lot of shame and stigma around everything mental health affiliated. And the idea that mental health was for those people, crazy people, sick people, and that if somebody was in therapy, they wouldn't be particularly open about it. And I think that there's just been this shift towards accepting and appreciating that life is hard and being human is hard, and that therapists are trained in particular ways of listening and particular kinds of conversations that can help us feel more alive, more calm on the inside, and more connected to the people that we love. I think there still is some growing edge for us collectively around couples therapy and sex therapy. Those are a couple of realms where people can still get a bit sensitive around needing help in terms of their intimate partnerships or in terms of their sex lives. But we're, maybe 10 years from now, you and I will be having this conversation and people will be like celebrating, I'm in sex therapy. Of course we're in couples therapy. Hopefully we're moving in that direction.
And too, on that point, do you feel like as an individual, regardless of a situation someone's in, do you feel like it benefits them to explore all these different types? I think the one common question everybody asks, well, I don't think I need help, but I've always felt like I think everybody needs therapy.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Here in the US, if you want your health insurance to, cover therapy, therapy is very often expensive. And because of mental health parity acts that have passed recently, it is much easier to have your health insurance reimburse you for therapy, which is wonderful. But it does mean that then you have to let yourself be diagnosed with something, which is unfortunate. It's unfortunate that we have a big old book of diagnoses, a diagnostic manual. So anybody really can find themselves somewhere on one of those pages of quote unquote mental disorders. But it does mean that there has to be some kind of a label stuck to a person in order to have therapy reimbursed by insurance. And it's unfortunate that that is the way that it is, because exactly what you're saying, Morgan, like it is, I think there is always a reason to hold time and space to have tender, deep conversation with somebody who is trained to help you understand yourself better. And in terms of couples therapy, I love it when couples come to me for therapy when they are thinking of moving in together, when they are preparing to get engaged, when they are transitioning to marriage. That it is much easier to do deep and helpful work than when somebody is, 15 years into a very painful dynamic and those ruts have gotten quite deep and dug in, or a couple hasn't made love in 5 years or 6 years. It's much harder to dig out of those really entrenched patterns versus seeking help early and often to lay down really healthy patterns.
Well, and that kind of, leads me into this situation. People are often asking me, how are you so happy and how are you so genuinely confident in who you are now? And I relate a lot of that to bad situations that I've been in because I've learned so much and I've grown so much.
Mhm.
But do you feel like people have to go through almost traumatic things to feel that growth? Or do you think they can still feel that growth without having gone through something terribly bad?
I love the idea of gentle awakenings, right? Of just sort of, as I remember years and years ago, Oprah Winfrey talked about, sometimes when we get the first brick upside our head, the first little inkling that we are creating a pattern for ourselves that's painful. If we don't pay attention to the brick upside the head, then we will get the entire brick wall crashing down upon us. And I think some of us can get a little bit more like, no, I got this. I'm good. I don't need help. And for some of us, the sort of wake up call has to be louder, but it doesn't have to be that way. As you're saying, Morgan, that there's, I think we can resource ourselves at any point in time. It's, one of the things I do is I teach an undergraduate class at Northwestern University called Marriage 101. Well, those students aren't going to get married for, any number of years, but there's lots that they can learn about understanding who they are and what they want and need in their intimate relationships. So I'm here for therapy early and often. I'm here for, gentle lessons, but I hear you. So did you have to learn some things in your life the hard way?
Oh yes. I mean, from bullying in high school to some abusive relationships, I've been through the trenches, and
Mm,
I don't wish that upon anyone, but I also look back and it helped me to become who I am today in
sure.
almost an unfortunate series of events. But now and today I look at that, and when people ask how and why, I'm like, well, this is where I came from. And so of course I would hope I'm better from that. But
Yeah.
you don't hope anybody ever goes through that, right? So
Well, and you didn't have to become better for it. You could have taken all of those painful experiences and you could have said, see, that just proves that life is unfair and I'm a constant victim and nothing good is going to happen to me, right? That you could have taken those experiences and allowed them to make you hardened and bitter. And you could have experienced like a loss of vitality, and you could have just kind of stayed stuck there. And I hear that you have done what you needed to do in order to have those experiences make you have use those experiences to fuel you into purpose and passion and capacity for joy. So
yeah,
that's wonderful.
absolutely. And I've loved that for me, but I would love that for other people too. So,
Sure.
do you have any just kind of very easy tools or very I guess good ideas for people who maybe have gone through that and they may find themselves in a very negative space?
Mhm.
Is there something that you suggest to them to just kind of get them over that hump to start to see the light again in a way?
Mhm, mhm. Well, I do think part of it is teasing apart that thing happened to me versus that thing defines me. I think part of what creates the conditions for people to get stuck is they confuse the things that happened to them with their identity, right? And all of us are more than any given painful experience, right? Each of us is an expression, I believe, each of us is an expression of, divine consciousness, whatever. Each of us belongs to this huge like collective of humanity and is part of something like far, far, far bigger than any one of us. And so to me, whatever pathways people use to kind of remember that, whether it's movement or music or dance or conversation or prayer or volunteer work, like whatever those gateways are that help people remember, like, oh, I belong and I'm part of something bigger than me. That I think is what helps us get clear that the bad experiences we live through do not define us.
Well, and that, leads me into this other way. I want to talk to you too about, the ways that we invalidate ourselves. And before we kind of get more into that, I'm guilty of it. I know a lot of people are of saying, others have it worse. It's
Hmm.
really easy for me to have a bad day. I see someone that's living with homelessness and I'm like, I have it
Yeah.
great, even though
Yep.
I could have had the worst day ever.
Mhm.
How do we get away from doing that and feeling that way? Because aren't we supposed to be able to have bad days and it's supposed to be okay? But how are we supposed to feel like that's okay?
Yeah, 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 yeah. Well, the only way that I know how to do it is with something that comes from psychology, which is called dialectics. So dialectics, our research has shown that a lot of our emotional resilience and emotional well-being rests upon our ability to hold a dialectic. And a dialectic is a space where competing truths, where two things are true at the same time. Two things that seem opposite are actually both true. I had a terrible day and I am blessed. those both are true. We can be blessed and suffering. Both those things can be true. I don't have to prove that I have it worse than anybody else in order to be entitled to my suffering. And the way that I do that is by holding both my grief and my gratitude, my courage and my fear, the fact that I'm whole as I am, and I'm forever a work in progress. Like these things that just seem like they can't possibly both be true at the same time that's part of the thing that makes being alive so complicated. So I think that is, if I had one of those moments, I certainly have had those moments where I am just in the suck. I am just like suffering and struggling and wanting to host a big old pity party for myself. And then I'm just like, I'm being ridiculous because there are people who have, quote unquote, actual problems. That both those things are true. Yes, I am absolutely blessed and I am absolutely, burnt out or struggling. So that's where I try to go. Because you're right. If I cannot validate my own suffering, you can bet that I'm not going to be able to validate the suffering of people around me. And then I'm not going to be very fun to be around because I'm going to be judgmental and dismissive, and like roll my eyes at people. And that's not going to be a recipe for healthy relationships.
Yeah. Well, and that was a question I had, when someone isn't validating themselves, or say someone isn't self-aware of themselves,
Mm-hmm.
what are the dangers for the people around them?
Lots. It's really difficult. It is really, I think it's very difficult to extend to others things that we can't extend to ourselves. I think that you're right. If I'm not self-aware, then everything that happens between you and I'm going to view it as your problem, your issue, your concern. If you have feedback from me, I'm going to be like, wow, Morgan, you are really, really sensitive, or you are overreacting. If I'm not willing to be like, okay, Morgan, so you experience me as whatever, impatient or judgmental. That's interesting. I'm gonna have to think about that. Like, let me kind of check in with myself about why I might have come across that way to you, right? That's self-awareness, is my willingness to accept your feedback and just sit with it. Not that you're necessarily right, but that if you have feedback for me about how I'm coming across to you, and if I care about the quality of our relationship, then what I'm going to do is just sit with it. I'm just going to see your holding up a mirror, to me about my behavior. I'm going to see that as an invitation rather than flipping it back on you. Morgan, you're being so critical. You're being so sensitive. You are wrong. I mean, people who lack self-awareness get really, really, they flip things quickly. Like they make everything about, the other person, because they don't have capacity to wonder about their own feelings, their own reactions, their own behaviors. And listen, we have to do, self-awareness work has to be done with a ton of compassion. If we're going to commit to the work of being self-aware, we have to be willing to be really gentle with ourselves, because we don't have to be perfect to be worthy of love and connection and care.
And being self-aware is kind of one of the big buzzwords right now, right? In psychology and therapy, and you just kind of answered a question that I had. Is it living up to all the hype? Should we be focusing so much on that? And what does that look like? Like if somebody hasn't ever heard the word self-aware and they're like, what do I need to do with that? What would be like the first steps you would tell someone to get through this first phase to be on that journey?
Yeah. Well, self-awareness that's my jam. That's how I spend really all day, every day, is supporting people in different ways, to understand with curiosity and with compassion who they are and why they are the way that they are. And I think it is essential. If what people want is high quality relationships, whether that's relationship with partner, relationship with their family members, relationship with their kids, we have to be willing to get curious about why we are reacting the way we're reacting in any given moment. Like that's just the work of it. So I think the first step is to just begin to notice how we're talking to ourselves. Notice when we have rise and fall of different emotions during the day, like just getting really curious and starting to view our thoughts and our feelings and our behaviors as data. It's just data that we then can sit with and wonder about. Um, and I think that, I think one of the things, you started off by asking about kind of what's changed in the last, couple of decades. I mean, the whole field of self-help, as I was growing up in the 80s, my mom always had a stack of self-help books next to her nightstand. So self-help isn't new necessarily, but we're living in this really exciting time of social media, of podcasts, where there's so many resources that somebody can bring in. And I think just listening to different podcasts that are about relationships or about psychology, or reading, following different Instagram accounts with these like daily small doses of self-awareness work. I think those are really gentle ways to start, especially if someone's not interested in, committing to therapy or something like that. But there's little things we can do each day to just begin to check in with ourselves.
No, I love that. And I think that's a great first step for so many people, because self-awareness has been the hardest battle for me. I think it's a hard battle for anyone, and it
Mhm.
can be almost intimidating to even try and conquer that mountain.
Right.
But do you
Right.
feel like too, like manifesting, journaling, doing breathing exercises, do you feel like those help you connect in a way to a different part of yourself? Do you feel like those are worth investing in as well?
Yes, you're not going to hear me talk about manifesting. That's sort of not my language or my avenue. But yes, journaling. My gosh, I love, I love journaling. That's been something part of my life since I was probably 15 years old. I filled up journals upon journals with my own, just thoughts and reactions. And those are wonderful gateways. I know breath work is something that matters a lot to people. I was thinking in terms of these questions yesterday, my husband and I were on a walk, and he said, I had a conversation with our 17-year-old daughter recently. And if you're available for some feedback, I had some feedback I'd like to share with you. And, one part of me, I can just feel my chest tightening up, like, oh my God, what did I do wrong? And who's disappointed in me? And another part of me was really excited because whatever feedback he has for me, again, it's not that he has the capital T truth about who I am as a person, but if he's gotten insight about a way in which, he and my daughter our daughter, the way that the two of them experienced me, then I want to know that, right? I want to know that, because then I can use their reactions. I can use their observations to teach me more about myself, to teach me about how I am at risk of coming across. And usually for me, it's how I'm at risk of coming across when I'm pushing myself too hard. When I'm pushing myself too hard, I become impatient with the two of them, right? Because I want them to do this, this, and this, because I'm stressed, because I'm in a hurry, because I feel overwhelmed. And that was what, our conversation was about. And even though part of me wishes that the people in my life only ever experienced me as an angel sent from above, that's not real life, right? And so that was really loving of him to say, hey, if and when you're available, I have some feedback on behalf of myself and our daughter.
I mean, I love that. And I love that he asked for the space to be able to do that. Obviously, a very healthy situation. How do you, suggest? I think it's hard for people to receive feedback, right? There's
Mhm.
criticism and there's unkindness, but then
Mhm.
there's feedback.
Mhm.
And because of social media, as great as it has been, I'm in that world. That's my job. There is also this other side that we've seen, this very cruel side of the world, right? So it's really
Mhm.
easy to loop in feedback with criticism and negativity. So how do we kind of look at something like, okay, this is feedback to help me versus this is
Yes.
criticism to hurt me?
That's right. Well, that's right. I think that's a very, very good point. And it's all, to me, it's all about the strength of the relationship. Yeah. If I will not take feedback from somebody where I have a sense that there's an ulterior motive or a hidden agenda or a lack of willingness to be in dialogue with me, in community with me, right? I won't take feedback from somebody where, if I don't have a sense that somebody has my back or has my interests, my best interests at heart, or who really can feel the core of me, as a good, decent person, then they don't get the right to give me feedback, right? And that I think it really is about the strength. I want us to be cultivating the kinds of relationships where there's enough trust that then feedback feels like a generous gift rather than an attack. And that's what there was, right? With my husband, I trust that he's in my corner. I trust that he has my back. I trust that whatever he wants and needs to say to me is in the service of everyone in our family feeling safe and understood and held and celebrated, rather than to take me down or to prove some point or to diminish me, right? That's to me where how to distinguish between the two.
When I do think too, in that same area, there's also resentment, right? We see a lot of relationships that people feel and resentment builds up over so much time.
Mhm.
For new couples, for even like couples that have been together a long time, how do you avoid, in a way, that resentment rut that everybody falls into?
Right. Yeah. Resentment is a big one. And I think resentment happens when we don't have that ability to give and receive feedback, right? If I can't give, if you've shown me that you are a closed door and that you will not take my feedback, and everything I try to bring up with you, you flip it back on me, then that's right. The absolute side effect is going to be that I'm going to build up resentment because I'm biting my tongue, because it feels really difficult to talk to you. So resentment is going to be the side effect. And it may help you in the moment because you don't have to deal with the difficulty of me giving you feedback. So in some ways you might be like, sweet, this is easy because she's not riding my ass. She's not telling me what I've done wrong, quote unquote. But the moment might feel like it's been solved, but the problem is I'm building up a well of resentment because you aren't open and available to dialogue. Now, it's incumbent on me that when I do have feedback for you, that I do it in a deeply loving way where I convey to you, Morgan, you are my heart. Like, I am deeply invested. And here's what I love about how things are going. And here's what I value. And I really make sure that I'm forward and explicit about all of the ways I can see you putting in effort, trying hard, like ways in which, I show you that I have your back. And then I say to you, I want to give you this feedback because of how much I love you, because of how much I want the space between us to feel good and safe and close, right? So that's all of so the person who wants and needs to give feedback has a deep responsibility to give feedback in a way that can be heard, for sure.
One and two, it sounds like along these same lines, it's always said, and it seems cliche that communication is so important, but it feels like that's the bottom layer of all of this, right? Like communicating is where it starts. And
Mm-hmm.
if there's no communication, I'm speaking to the younger side of my audience here that are dating and out in that world right now, that communication is such a basic level of necessity in a relationship
Mm-hmm.
that if that's not there, it's almost really hard to do any of these other things that we're talking about. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And communication is more than just like saying words, right? It is talking about something, talking about my internal experience, my thoughts, my reactions that I'm having in my relationship with you, and saying it in a way that communicates also empathy and benefit of the doubt, right? Sometimes I spend quite a bit of my time in couples therapy with people who are like, I'm just expressing my feelings. I can say what I want because I'm communicating. Well,
Mm.
communicating it's not just a free for all, right? We have to be mindful of we have to start with the end in mind, right? How do I want this conversation to go? If I want you to be open and receptive and to take what I'm saying in, then I had better start, by calming myself down, right? Sort of like whatever it is. I mean,
Mhm.
like literally like listening to music, like taking some deep breaths, asking you first, hey, like Todd did yesterday with me, are you available for feedback, right? There's things that we need to do around communication that's more than just spitting out every single thought and feeling that's knocking around inside of your head, for sure.
Well, and do you see too, I'm putting myself just in this vulnerability of talking about this because of just the different experiences I've had. But, I worked so long to get past my trauma of my past relationships. And now that I'm in this really healthy one, I'm so much better about communicating in the way that you're talking about, but it still comes out, right? It's still, there's still trauma that's coming out, that's still trying to figure it out. And I'm guilty of 90% of the time. I can think before I speak. I can make sure I'm talking without all the emotion added in. But how is that something, what are some ways that me, and I'm sure there's a lot of people like me, can think before we speak and
Right.
speak with true emotion rather than just the immediate reaction?
That's right. That's right. Well, Morgan, I love that you are modeling that, because you're right. Maybe, maybe when I'm 80, I will have this all figured out, but not, I've been at it for a long ass time, and I've had some really wonderful therapists supporting me along the way. And I'm probably at about 90% also, but there's that 10% where I just say something. And then the thing that I notice, and this may be true for you also, the the amount of time it takes me to realize that I've just said something in a really, gnarly way, that's a lot shorter than it used to be years ago, right?
Yes.
And
Mhm.
I'm much better at circling back around and making a repair. So I think that we always, I think we can continue to work on communicating mindfully, regulating ourselves, calming ourselves down before we start talking. That's all wonderful. But we also need to have a set of skills around how we make repairs, how we apologize. And lots of us grew up in homes where we didn't see apology and forgiveness modeled for us. So we may actually not even know how to make a heartfelt apology. And so when we do go into that 10% of the time where we say things, where we speak before thinking, where we allow our emotional brain to be in the driver's seat rather than our wise brain, we have to learn how to and be willing to look our partner in the eyes and say, I'm sorry. I don't like how I said that. I would like a redo. Or with our kids, looking our kids
Mhm.
in the eye and saying, listen, I don't like how I said that. I'm going to put myself in timeout and calm myself down. And I would like to come back and try again because I don't like how I handled that moment. And if we want to supercharge that apology, we can say, do you want to tell me how it felt? What was it like for you? And I said, when I was impatient with you, or I said that unkindly, you want to tell me how that felt? That's like some next level repair, right? To just say,
And
I
that's
don't
being
like.
ready to take that on. You're like, "Oh boy, that's a whole other level of taking on what I just
Sure.
did."
Sure. And then if there's trust in the relationship, what our partner will say is, yeah, it didn't feel good. Or our kid will say, yeah, it didn't feel good. And I love you.
Mhm.
Right. And I know you're a good person who had a bad day. And I know that you're working hard to, heal stuff that started long before you even knew me.
And just the older I get, the more I realize everybody comes with things. You're just gonna have to accept certain things that you want
Mhm.
or work through things. Nobody's gonna come perfect. There's gonna be baggage along the way no matter what.
Mhm.
How that looks is up to you. And I just want your kind of advice on for so many people, because relationships, regardless if they were even good, maybe they weren't as bad as mine in the dramatic sense that they were, they're just hard
Right.
and they can be traumatic and very hard to move on from. So how do we jump into another relationship after, say, our heart gets broken and things are hard?
Yeah.
How do we go into a new relationship and find that level of vulnerability again and work
Mhm.
through that trauma? Because you almost need that other person to work through that trauma, and it's hard.
I think we don't spend nearly enough time talking to people about healthy relationships and healthy sexuality and all of that good stuff. But we also don't spend enough time talking with people about how to break up well, how to integrate after loss, how to start over again. And I'm finding myself doing more and more of that work, even with therapists. When I'm presenting at therapist conferences, I very often am talking with therapists about how to help clients break up well, heal heartbreak, start again, because I think that there is not something that therapists necessarily have been trained in doing. And it's what you are talking about. I think, there's heartbreak in relationship endings hurt for all kinds of reasons, including like literal brain science. Like our brains code emotional pain in the same way that our brains code physical pain. So heartbreak hurts because it hurts, right? That it is painful. And I think we sometimes have these like misguided coping mechanisms where we'll say to ourselves, it shouldn't hurt like this because they were no good for me anyways. It shouldn't hurt like this because it was only a 3-month long relationship. It shouldn't hurt like this because whatever, my friends didn't like them anyways. Well, all that will do when we invalidate ourselves, all that's going to do is make our healing journey take that much longer because we aren't even letting ourselves start the journey, right? We're invalidating ourselves out of the journey versus letting ourselves grieve the loss of that relationship. Even if we are the one who ended it, you can be the one who ended a relationship and still grieve the loss of that relationship. You're losing the future you imagined with that person, and you are having to let go of what that relationship meant and the experiences you had. And every grief, grief is synergistic, meaning that the grief in the loss of this relationship is going to awaken the grief of the loss of my father or my grandmother, or that move that we had to make, or that tragedy that happened in my community. Like griefs chain together. And so for as hard as it is, there's also that opportunity in a breakup to just like have that season or that chapter of loss and letting ourselves just be very much present to that without shrinking it, minimizing it, rationalizing it, moving through it, getting the lessons, and then starting to kind of come up out of it. That's a process that if we don't like constrict it, it will just happen, right? We will come through it. And the goal is to come through it open-hearted rather than to come through it kind of like scabbed over and hardened and cynical. And I think the way that we do that is by just letting the loss be exactly the length and width and height that it is.
I love that. And I think it's so true. There's so many people that I know, a lot of my friends who I've seen them hurt from 2-month relationships compared to a
Sure,
2-year relationship.
sure.
And I
Mhm.
think there's something to be said that we bond with people so differently, and that
Mhm.
there is no one size fits all for
Right.
everything.
That's right.
And I think that's important to share and reiterate, because I just don't think we hear that enough.
100%. I recently posted where, no, was it it was a podcast episode that I had done. Where one of the points that I made is some of us who've had heartbreak, some of us who have survived trauma. One of the things that sometimes happens is that we no longer fall in love. We become the kind of people who step into love. And that can feel sad. Like, I miss the fact that, when I was younger, before I knew hurt, like I know hurt, before that, I would fall head over heels. And I don't do that anymore. Rather than seeing that as something that's wrong with us, just allowing that to be what it is, and to know that there is not, as you're saying, there is no right and wrong way to bond with somebody, and stepping into love is beautiful. There's a wisdom to that. There's a gentleness to that. There's a way that when we step into love, we aren't like short circuiting our nervous systems, right? So it can be a
Mhm.
kinder process, and that's okay. I want people to know that that's okay.
And I mean, I'm someone who's sitting here listening to this and I'm like, preach, yes, because I have done both. I have
Uh-huh.
been the woman in the enticing, intoxicating relationship, and I've also now been in this incredibly healthy relationship, and I can tell you, on this side of things, on the healthier side, it is so much more rewarding and enjoyable than the intoxicating situations that we see in movies that we think we want.
Yeah, right. You don't perhaps feel intoxicated, but what you do feel is I imagine safe and calm, and like your nervous system is like taking a big exhale, and that can feel really different. And
Yes.
sometimes we are at risk of not knowing, is this calm or is this boredom? And I think sometimes
Yes.
we mislabel it as boredom when actually it's just the system like quieting down because we're safe, because there's predictability, because people's words and actions are aligning, and we perhaps have not had that experience before.
Because everyone is busy, we're in this society that's so productive, so engrossed in social media. What are some really good ways that people can disconnect to then connect with themselves to kind of see where they're at, maybe get a read on where they're feeling and what their body is going through to even see, do I need to go talk to someone? What am I feeling right now? Do you have any tips for people on the best ways to kind of disconnect to reconnect with themselves?
Right. Boy, it is really easy we could have our phones in our hands, every waking moment of the day. And I think especially, it wasn't that long ago where we would have like an alarm clock, like the thing that would wake us up in the morning would be an alarm clock. And so you would turn off your alarm, you would open your eyes, you would get out of bed, brush your teeth, and then at some point you would connect with the outside world. Well, today, the vast majority of us have our alarm clocks, have our phones as our alarm clocks, right? So it is like, it could be 3 seconds between the moment the alarm goes off and the moment we have Instagram open or Twitter open or the news feed open, right? So there's just no gap between wakefulness and consumption of outside energy. So I love the idea of people just really taking an assessment of like where, do they ever allow themselves? I mean, I think people sometimes when they're driving, they get to a stoplight and they'll grab their phone and they'll do, all these things where we just, every pause we fill in with outside energy rather than giving ourselves these moments. There's a researcher named Sherry Turkle who studies our relationships with technology, and she calls them like the boring bits, like the little moments, like when you're sitting in the waiting room at the dentist's office, when you are sitting at a red light, when you're in line at Starbucks. Like those are all boring bits where if we keep our phone in our pocket or in our purse, we can just stand there and look around, breathe, and in those spaces our minds start to wander. And that's our self, right? That's that bubbling up of our own thoughts, our own energy, our own daydreams. Like that's the self. That's how the self reveals itself, right? And so if we are constantly with our phones open, we're consuming everybody else's opinions, everybody else's energy, and we are really disconnecting from our own. So those would be some really simple practices.
I love that. And I don't even want to ask the other questions because I feel like that's such a great space to end on because it encourages people to really just enjoy the space that they're in those moments. And I love the idea of the boring bits because I am guilty of that, like most.
I am too. I am too. Well, and people who are dating, right? If you're dating, when you're in line at Starbucks, whatever, just keep your phone down because maybe there's like a total cutie, around you, and like
Yes.
you don't have to meet your person on a dating app, right? There are actual people out, and I know it's been very hard in the pandemic with masks and social distancing and all of that. But as we, fingers crossed, start to come out of it, right? We can like, oh, there's people around that are, in my orbit and that I could perhaps meet in that way.
And I will ask you this, and it's something that I've learned just in when I am doing good about being very self-aware and not picking up my phone and trying to give myself that space to just exist. I have noticed more people, even when I'm walking in the gym. Say I'm working out and I'm passing somebody, I'm scrolling through music to select of what I'm
Yes,
doing.
that's
I'm
right.
not paying attention to anyone who's around me. So in my group of girlfriends, I've suggested, hey, it's hilarious that you say this because I've literally said to them, hey, maybe just try to be more present when you go somewhere, and maybe there's going to be something that you didn't think you'd see. I don't know. I'm not
Mhm.
sure if that works, but it's a suggestion. So, do you feel like that is a way that can kind of help people in this era that we're in of social media
Mm.
dating to hopefully meet someone? Is that something that we're
Oh,
missing?
100%, 100%. I've had, I oftentimes have a team of graduate students, who are people in their mid to later 20s. And they will say, like, I will, if I, like one of my students said a few years ago, I realized that I had forgotten how to flirt in real life. So I took the dating apps off my phone for a while and I just did exactly what you're saying. I just kept my head up when I was at the gym or at Starbucks or Trader Joe's. I just like kind of kept my head up and looked around, and I was like, oh, I actually do know how to make eye contact with somebody or start small talk with somebody. And even if it's not romantic, like you said, like you might see something, well, but you might see as a sweet interaction between a father and his son that just warms your heart and helps you feel connected to the goodness of humanity. Or you might see whatever, some lovely exchange that is a counter to all of the kind of fear-loaded heaviness of our world today. And we're not going to see that if we've got our faces in our phones. So even if it's not right that you might meet your person that way, you might just see something that helps you kind of tap into a sense of joy or hope or grace, that's just so essential for all of us.
I love that so much. And that's such a great space for us to end on. Now, I also, right before I let you go, even though you gave us so many awesome pieces, I want people to know where they can find you, where they
Mm.
can hear you. I mean, because I know people are going to want to hear more from you after all of this. So give
Mhm.
me the lowdown where everybody can hear, see you, do all the things.
Yes. Well, a lot of it's on our phones. So, when after you've had some moments of observing the world around you, you can go to my website, which is dralexandrasolomon.com. And that's got links to my social media. I'm really quite active on Instagram. I have a podcast, Reimagining Love, that you can listen to wherever you listen to your podcast. We cover a really wide range of mostly romantic relationships. We talk about parenting. We talk about cultural dynamics. It's been a really lovely project. And I've got books that are available wherever books are sold. And I've got e-courses. So all of the best place is the website, because that really is the
Okay.
portal to all of the things.
And you are an incredible follow on Instagram. I've been following ever since we scheduled this interview. I've been making sure to see everything so we could talk about different things that you're really, posting and talking about. And you are a awesome follow on Instagram. Just a good reminder to have in your feed. So I will also say that. What is your Instagram for everyone?
Dr.alexandra.solomon.
Okay, love that. Thank you so much. It's been incredible talking with you, and I appreciate you taking some time to come on and teach us a lot of things that I think we all needed to hear.
Thank you, Morgan. It was a fun conversation. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course.